Hello everyone, my name is David Varsimashvili. Are compliance regulations becoming so complex that they are killing the businesses? This compliance is no longer a side function. It's a core operational requirement. AML assessment is no longer just a regulatory requirement. It's a fundamental necessity to safeguard organizations from financial, legal, and reputational risks. Do sanctions work or not? The answer is both yes and no.
Hello, everyone, and welcome you to today's webinar, which is going to be a very excited one. When someone told me about what Chris does, I was immediately super excited to present this new topic for you. It is not strictly related to payments and banking, but as they say, follow the money and you will find out what's going on. And this is exactly what Chris is an absolute expert. Today's webinar's topic is going to be about your digital wallet exposed, how payment apps have different pitfalls and how you can avoid them. But overall, we are going to talk about private investigations. How do we relate that to financial transactions? How financial investigators are even going into social media. So today is going to be packed with very valuable, super interesting information about how we can find out more information about people online through their payments and their habits. So welcome, Chris. Welcome you here in this Soltesz Institute webinar episode. I'm really excited to have you with us today. Tell us a bit more about yourself. What do you do? How do you do it? And why do you do all of that?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Victoria. I appreciate it. It's exciting to be here. So my name is Chris Salgado. I'm the founder, CEO of All Points Investigations. We're a global physical investigations company. We do cyber investigations and physical investigations for various entities, individuals, corporations, law firms, even other private investigators. We do a multitude of different topics of investigations. We cover supply chain investigations. We run anti-counterfeit investigations, threat management kind of at large. We even do cult investigations, CULT investigations. That kind of came from left field. But we do a lot of different types of things. A lot of people lean on us for our cyber component because I've been an investigator for a little over 24 years. And before my company, All Points Investigations, I was in California and I was an investigator at Facebook. And I helped build the investigations division at Facebook globally for a while. So post Facebook, when I opened up my company, a lot of people are really leaning on us for our cyber components to help try to bring some evidence and intelligence to situations at hand, whatever it may be, such as what I expressed earlier.
Super interesting. And as we usually do, we collected some questions from the audience before the webinar. But I would like to encourage everyone that the topic is just so wide and Chris is such an expert. Just please add your questions, ask different subjects from us. Please pick our brains because That's the only way that we can make an ethical and transparent industry together. So today we just brought you a couple of questions, but I would like to encourage everyone to reach out to us after or even during the webinar, and please start talking about this because I feel like it's a really, really interesting topic. So let's jump for the first question, which is starting with the payment industry immediately. What security and privacy missteps have you seen people make in terms of using convenience-oriented payment methods? Everything is convenient, but is it secure? What do you think? What have you seen in this field?
Well, you said it right. I mean, it's convenience over safety, right? And just putting it black and white, I hope nobody would choose convenience over safety, but our attitudes, our behaviors, our actions really shift towards convenience more than security. So in my world, I'm chasing offenders down, but I'm also pivoting and returning to the client and saying, okay, let's talk about how you got here. If you've got a cyber stalker, if you're engaged as a victim of an ATO account takeover, and that's anything. Social media account was hijacked from you, bank account was hijacked from you, email account was hijacked from you, which is very, very damning if your email account gets hijacked because almost everything comes back to your email account. So yeah, we're not only doing the investigations, but we're also educating individuals on how to be safe online, how to enjoy themselves online, including social media, but also to be safe and not overexpose themselves. So within that realm, it's astonishing to me how open we are with our information. Less astonishing today than it was 24 years ago. But nonetheless, you have payment platforms, you have these peer-to-peer payment platforms that by default, they're public. All of your transactions are public. All of your recipients are public. All of your contacts are public as well. In fact, I think it was in 2021 when a journalist exposed President Biden's kind of social network based on a peer-to-peer payment platform. And they were able to identify some decent sources, family members, friends, and such of President Biden's because they looked at this peer-to-peer payment platform. So by default, a lot of these programs, a lot of these apps have everything publicized. So you're talking the transactions themselves, you're talking the recipient, you're talking the payer or the sender. If you're the recipient, you're talking the dollar amount, you're talking about when that happened too. So analyzing all of this available data, you can establish behaviors on that. You can go ahead and pull back the curtain and see exactly who you might be dealing with. Now, the good of that is me as an investigator, when I'm chasing an offender, that's sweet for me to come across that. But when you pivot that into, a non-bad actor, I'll say, then it's concerning exposure. And social engineering, in my opinion, is the most dangerous threat out there, far beyond a hacker, far beyond any kind of technical infiltration, because you don't need a technical kind of skill set or prowess to engage in social engineering. At the end of the day, we're all human. We have hearts. We have heartstrings that can be pulled upon. And that's how social engineering excels exceedingly. And depending on what report you read, every single cyber attack that you've heard about has had an element of social engineering at the onset about 98% of the time. So they basically put together a dossier on you and engage their social engineering attack on you. And they're able to polish their phishing engagement or whatever attack it is that they deploy against you so much more effectively because they have your personal information embedded inside of it. We used to laugh about, those emails that we would see, oh, I'm the prince of whatever country and you, I have a lot of money for you and, just send me this information. And it's just filled with grammatical errors, misspells, and it's a horrible email to look at. Nowadays, you've got really pointed, really polished attacks against you, and they're peppered with your own personal information due to these social engineering campaigns. So back to the thought of peer-to-peer payment platforms, you get that information, now you can understand your subject, and go ahead and make your inevitable cyber attack or whatever attack it may be, ransomware attack, whatever it is, that much more critical and dangerous.
So you're saying that even though that we've got very sophisticated, very secure platforms, every platform is just as safe as the human element in it, not to, mess it up, right? So even though that I have the best payment app, the latest technology, encrypted everything, but if I'm whispering my password to my friend, and obviously if there's access to that, then what's these security features for? So you say that how you start the investigation is that you find all of those weakest links, the vulnerabilities, by going back and see what have you done, who did you talk to, what emails you sent, and this is how you get the full picture of all the clues that you can start your investigations, right?
Yeah, I mean, the peer-to-peer payment platforms, that's one element. I mean, me as an investigator, I'm going to capitalize on whatever information I can get, right? And it's all, of course, legal and ethical, but nonetheless, I'm going to rope in what I can to assemble a dossier on the offender, right? Who conducted this hack? Who conducted the cyber attack? Who's stalking this individual? So that's one of many different elements that I focus on to try to ascertain as much information on the offender as possible. And then the idea is ultimately to bring them to some kind of justice for the client, whether it's a civil engagement or criminal engagement or a combination of the both of them.
Right. So let's say that I get hacked and I get robbed and unfortunately I'm a victim of a crime. Then I also need to understand where did I go wrong and where I leave my data, because I can bet that everyone who is engaging you says, I haven't done anything wrong. It's all of a sudden my account opened itself and the money disappeared. But there are clues where all of these security standards failed, not because of the design, but because how people are using them. Correct.
Yeah, and it's a very critical assessment at this point because you don't want to blame the victim, right? They're already down hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever amount is significant to them. Frankly, if you get $1 stolen, that's still a problem. It's something that victimizes you. But having said that, yes, as you put it, we are our weakest link in our kind of overall security apparatus as a society, working with banks, working with social media companies, working with your whatever other accounts it might be, your library card, your medical records, anything like that. I mean, we are all the weakest link in that entire security apparatus. We work for Fortune-based companies all the time, and they have millions of dollars of a cybersecurity apparatus. It doesn't matter. One person on the inside can unfold all of that due to a social engineering campaign. And you can even extend it out to something like an insider threat situation. That's not social engineering. That's an employee that's ticked off at the company for whatever reason, and they just decide to take it upon themselves to kind of go back at the company and do some damage. So that puts a different stance, a different perspective on our data. Okay, so in that perspective is you could be 100% on your OPSEC, your operational security. You could be 100% with all of your data. You could be on point. You could have password manager. You could have solid security questions, which, by the way, never answer those security questions accurately. If he says, what's your mother's maiden name? Put something like garbage truck. I mean, because if somebody looks at your Facebook account and they design, okay, well, this is the person's mother, this is the person's maiden name, they have that information. So make it hard for them to ascertain that information and guess your security question answer and get access to your account. But anyway, back to my point, we could be locked up with our data. But where we exist, where our data exists, can be infiltrated. So banks have been infiltrated, right? Breached, hacked, leaked, whatever word you want to use, where relevant. So now our data is in the hands of third parties, a bank, a social media account, right? A streaming service. They're hacked or they're leaked or breached in some way. Now your information, even though you're copacetic and you're locked down with your data, now it's out there. So it's critical that you not only lock yourself up with your data, but you're also mindful of where these hacks take place, where these breaches occur. Because if you have an account there, you find out passwords were engaged or accessed by bad actors, you want to quickly make sure that you pivot appropriately.
But these are so complex. If you think about it, usually people are using the same password in multiple platforms simply because who is going to remember my password on this platform, on that platform? So nowadays we need password basically for everything, even which does not have any kind of harm to us, right? So just to log into your shopping cart and see what you have purchased without even the card details, you need to have a specific password. So I came across a lot of cases when people just cannot deal with the requirements. So, for example, do not give your mother's maiden name. Okay, but if I'm 3 years down the line, someone is asking me the security question, how will I remember what was the answer that I gave, 3 years ago just to cheat the system, right? So what I have seen is that a lot of people have either the same passwords everywhere, or they have a document with all the passwords. So basically it's a single point of failure. You just get in there and then, everything about the people. So don't you think that this complexity somehow backfires, because the more complicated we make it to be, then that's how we create security vulnerabilities?
It can be. It can be. You just got to be organized with it. So absolutely, you're not going to remember 3 years later, staying relevant to your example. You're not going to remember 3 years later that you said you put the phrase garbage truck in for your mother's maiden name. So you want to make sure that you document all of this. And I get it. All of us have 50, 100, 200, 500 accounts. I get that. But at some point, we have to take on the onus of being as responsible as possible. And part of that is not recycling your passwords. And I don't care how many times I say it, you say it, people still do it. Or they do a small variation. If your password is password first, it should never be password. And by the way, password never exists, by the way. It should be passphrases, not a single word. But you could use your password as your rabbit, something like that. And then they'll put on, for another account, they'll use the password rabbit1, rabbit2, rabbit3. Well, that's very easily overcome. So having said that, you obviously have to document all of this, right? Write it down, put in a fireproof safe or something like that. I get that we can't remember everything. And are we really going to write down everything to 200 different accounts? Do the best that you can. Use password managers whenever you need to, and just go that extra mile to be as diligent as possible and help yourself, because in the end, it's your data, it's your money. And like I said, if you're not primarily focusing on your finances or your email accounts, that can be taken from you and you lose almost everything, because almost everything's connected to your email account, your streaming service, like you said, your grocery delivery app, your finances, all that stuff is connected to your email account. So you want to make sure that you safeguard that as much as possible. Now, there are priorities, right? You want to safeguard, as I said, the email, the finances a little bit more rigidly than you do of some unknown, forgotten social media account, something like that from 20 years ago, right? So you do want to install those priorities to help you prioritize your thoroughness in making sure that you safeguard yourself as much as possible. But you just want to make sure that you take that time to do it, because if you don't, one episode that you're not anticipating can completely invert your world, and it can wipe you out financially.
Wow, and this is so scary. And I think it also goes down to the education part, because a lot of people don't even understand what is the data being asked and why. So oftentimes I see that people say that, the bank asked for my passport copy, they don't have the right, when actually they do. However, they are giving out very sensitive data immediately for platforms which are really shady. So it's also down to the person's own level of education to understand what are these AML, KYC, data checking kind of tools that can be used on them and how it can be used on them. So it also adds a bit of complexity to the case, that what am I sharing with who and to what level, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you got to know who your audience is. You got to know who the person is or who the entity is that you're divulging this information. You got to do your research. And I want to be very careful here. Again, back to the critical assessment. We're not blaming the victim. I understand that. But we have an onus, we have a harsh duty to ourselves to protect our data. You should protect your data as hard as you protect your money, because these days our data is worth more than gold and oil combined. And if somebody has that data, they can upset your life significantly. People have been hollowed out from their finances from sextortion cases, romance scams, cryptocurrency cases, and unfortunately, they've ended their lives. So you can expect that dramatic outcome sometimes. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. Put in that extra effort to not recycle passwords. When you create usernames and passwords, assemble them so they don't mimic your life or your name or your person at all. If you're a cat person, don't say Fluffy. If and don't use your pets' names, by the way. Don't use your kids' names, by the way. I mean, you want to detach your data from you as much as possible, right? So in the event somebody's scoping you out, they can't really tie Chris Salgado to Chris Salgado at gmail.com, right? You want to just keep that one arm's distance between yourself as an individual and your data, because then it becomes that much fuzzier for people trying to engage you.
True, true. Do you have actually any stories related to banking apps impacting the course of all the high-stake investigation? Have you ever come across one of those?
I mean, banks themselves across the globe have been involved in leaks, right? There's leaked records out there. Again, we use them. And the problem becomes, as I said, you can go ahead and install a rigid regimen on safeguarding your data. But once your bank is infiltrated and your exposure is out there, your bank account, full bank account, your password to your bank, your personal information, your address, and so forth, like that, whatever is relevant inside that leaked data, because it depends on what information is accessed. But yeah, I mean, it can be critical not only to me as an investigator to assemble a profile, a dossier on the offender, but reverse that. And what brought me to the table in the first place was the bad actor did that to the victim. And the victims no longer are just reserved for the banking institution, directors of large companies. Unfortunately, the bad actors have gained some decent intelligence to say, okay, well, I'm not going to be exclusive to the financial institution anymore. I'm going to include them. But there's 7 billion people in the world, and how many have access online in some capacity, a phone, computer, whatever it is? I think that number was like 5 billion or something like that fairly recently. Excuse me if I'm skewing the number. But I mean, think about that. If they go ahead and open up the aperture of prospects out there and they get, I don't know, $1,000, $50,000 from somebody across the multitude of types of individuals, and not just reserve it to the financial institutions as they did, I don't know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it may be, pre-online. But then they're going to have a much, much greater return. I mean, these underground illicit operations, they're in the business of, I think the watered down number is billions and billions and billions of an industry. And I think that's highly watered down. I think it's in the trillions of industries as far as fraud at large online, right? So yes, there's been plenty of times that we've seen, and you've seen it too in the media, Bank A through Bank Z, some of them have been peppered by attacks inside or outside. And that information reveals their customers, the customer's bank information, and that results in their impending or their inevitable attack. So again, you got to make sure that you safeguard yourself as much as possible as an individual, but you also have to pay attention to what's going on out there. And as soon as you hear your bank was hit or whatever platform or company that you have a subscription to or a membership to or have some kind of profile with, you got to make sure that you assess that. Okay, is that something that I need to jump on as much as possible? Well, high stakes is subjective, right? Somebody might think $1,000 is a lot of money that they lose from an attack, and somebody might say $1,000 is not a lot of money. It's $500,000 is a lot of money for them. But ultimately, it stems from the same type of engagement, and that's data, where they get it from you directly through a phishing campaign or social engineering campaign, or they go to somebody or something that you're familiar with or affiliated with, your bank, and that happens a lot.
Do you think it's getting worse or getting easier? Because if you think about it, all the banks and the financial institutions now really need to know who are they doing business with, right? So every time I send money to someone, it's not just me who is being checked, but the someone who is receiving the money is also being checked. Obviously, they are going through all the opening an account or the passport copy and whatnot the financial institution holds on them. So technically, people would think that even if there is a fraud, even there is even a mistake that I'm sending money to someone, it's okay because I'm sending it through the financial system and everybody knows. I mean, obviously, the banks and financial institutions should know where the money is going to. But we still talk about fraud, right? So how does it work? What did you experience that if I'm sending the money, can I actually send it to someone that no one knows anything about that person? The person is just cashing out and disappearing. How does that work? Hello everyone, my name is Viktoria Soltesz and I'm the founder of the Soltesz Institute. Startups fail. And if they fail, most probably they are failing because they don't have the thought out and proper channels for payments and banking.
Hello everyone, my name is David Vartimashvili. Compliance is no longer a side function. It's a core operational requirement.
Welcome everybody. I'm Marcia Klingensmith. Instant payments is transforming the way money moves all across the globe, across all the different industries.
If I'm sending the money, can I actually send it to someone that no one knows anything about that person? The person is just cashing out and disappearing. How does that work?
Well, in my opinion, it works pretty painfully poorly in a lot of instances, not every instance. And I'm not pointing a finger at any banks specifically, but I'll cite recently the Department of Justice here in the United States engaged TD Bank, right? And I think TD Bank made a settlement for something like $3 billion or something like that last year. And that was because the Department of Justice, according to the report, Department of Justice identified plenty of times, a significant number of times where the bank wasn't doing its due diligence on certain transactions, right? I'm paraphrasing here. So that resulted in the DOJ being involved, and then ultimately the settlement of $3 billion or so. And I believe that was the largest number attributed to a bank, maybe with U.S. ties. I don't want to skew up the details there, but nonetheless, it really paints the idea that banks have an enormous onus to go through their KYC process and really try to support their customer, trying to engage in business in some capacity, right, personal or professional, to help them out per transaction. So therefore, per individuals involved in that transaction. So when they don't do that, you have bank customers being able to send $50,000 to somebody that they never had a transaction with before, send somebody $100,000 or $10,000 multiple times, right? But prior to that first installment of $10,000, they have had no history with that person, and the person's overseas usually, right? So the system is set up where banks are supposed to go through the KYC process. Any anomalies should be engaged as much as possible, right? I get that banks are limited with their personnel, but they nonetheless have that onus. And when that doesn't happen, you have people engaging me, frankly, saying that, hey, I lost $500,000 to a romance scammer. I lost $750,000 to a romance scammer. So yes, the idea is that if you institute a payment from or within a financial institution, yes, there's an image there that you're protected, but that's not always the case. So it goes back to what I said before. We have to be diligent because it's our information, it's our data, it's our money, right? Again, not blaming the victim, but like we have to take it upon ourselves to protect our data just as we protect the money in our wallet.
Yeah. So how can an average person like audit their security and privacy exposure? What can an average person do to make sure that, okay, I do everything in my capacity to actually do the right thing?
I mean, there's several steps. You want to, a really good, healthy way of covering, the topic that you mentioned, but also covering your online exposure at large for banking information and then for other information that can nonetheless pull your data and assemble a profile on you for a social engineering campaign is watered down as Googling yourself, right? And we do a lot more than that. We do reputation management for billionaires. So we go ahead and we identify how exposed they are, and we try to take down that information as much as possible, the concerning information, right? So you can't really address your first step effectively until you know what you're dealing with. Well, how do you know what you're dealing with? You got to understand how exposed you are, right? Maybe you don't know all of the hacks and leaks that have occurred. There's no maybe about it. Nobody does. There's lots and lots and lots of hacks and leaks of data that don't make the mainstream radio, that don't make the mainstream news. So you want to make sure that you just try to secure yourself with understanding how exposed you are. You want to make sure, and then address accordingly, right? And then make sure that you never store your information in your browser. It's super convenient, but don't do it. You're going to plug in your contact information. You're going to plug in your payment information all the time. A little bit of an inconvenience, but that's okay. You should be willing to inherit that. So don't store your information in your browser, your password, your username, your addresses, your payment cards, anything like that. You want to make sure that you practice, like I said, safe online hygiene for your own personal information. Don't use email addresses that say Chris Salgado on them, chrissalgado@gmail.com. Now, I get that we're all coming from a world of where we all want to just say chrissalgado@gmail.com. Makes sense. I did that 20 years ago or whatever it is, right? I get that. But gravitate towards something that's more sanitary, something that's more generic, because now we've morphed into a world where all of our data is the target of different types of attacks. It's a different world online now than it was 20 years ago. So we have to pivot to make sure that we don't fall victim as much as possible to these attacks, right? So you want to make sure you do that. You want to make sure that you install 2FA on your accounts, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, right? If you've got hardware keys, go ahead and do that. The UB keys and such like that. Never use SMS text for two-factor authentication. There's almost no security there whatsoever. Use authenticator apps, push notifications, all kinds of stuff like that. But once again, you want to make sure that you know how exposed you are, because then you can pivot, you can address it and not be told how exposed you are, because now you got an attack at your front door.
So you've got a new engagement, let's say a victim reaches out to you and says that unfortunately I lost $50,000 for a romance scam. So then you go through all of those vulnerabilities, what happened, obviously collecting the data, going through the messages, identifying that this is what goes wrong. But you also help the person to set up those kind of security measures that it's not happening again. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. So the first engagement typically is to engage the offense, right? Nobody calls Chris to say hi. They call because something happened to them. So we help them as much as we can by trying to engage the situation. That's an offender. That's a situation where it's a hack or something like that. And then where warranted and when approved by the client, we'll pivot and go back to the client and say, okay, how did you get here? Let's clean up your exposure online. Let's do what we can. Let's go ahead and do a consultation and understand, okay, what is your pattern? What's your behavior when you're online? Because a lot of people don't think about safety online. You do when you plug in your password. But beyond that, when you're navigating and when you're constructing a profile, whether it's a dating app or a new social media app or whatever it may be, or a streaming service profile, whatever it may be, you don't really consider stuff like that. So you want to give as little information as possible. Again, try to not give real information when possible. But as you point out, you better document that so you can go ahead and revert to that as necessary. So you want to just try to live your life and enjoy being online, enjoy social media, enjoy all these entertainment apps and stuff like that. That's okay. Live your life online, but just make sure that you do so where you're benefiting from the connectivity, but you're also safeguarding yourself, your information. You want to make sure that you, again, don't ever give in to the social media kind of social engineering prep course for the bad actors. I remember it was years ago that different social media platforms were sending out, or individuals on different social media platforms were sending out surveys. And they were supposedly fun surveys. Hey, what is your mom's last name? Or where's your favorite place to go? What's your favorite food? Who's your favorite author? And they would pass this around their social network. Well, these are the questions sometimes for these security questions. So you're just giving all this information out. So the bad actors are loving this. They're seeing that kind of menu of services or menu of characteristics about you, and they're assembling a profile. And one of those times, probably that question or that answer is going to hit. You got to make sure that you safeguard your information.
Wow. And also, you mentioned one very interesting thing that you do for billionaires about the reputation check online. Can you tell us a bit more about how does it work and why is it super important?
Yeah, I mean, it's the effect of what we're talking about here. And we do it for billionaires, we do it for millionaires, we do it for individuals too, where you don't have to be wealthy, because everybody should care about their information online, their exposure rate, right? So you want to know how exposed you are, how many accounts do you have out there, because there's impersonation accounts, right? If you depend on your status in society or your status within your company, you might have bad actors that pretend to be you. And we get those cases all the time from corporations. Hey, this corporation, company ABC, we learned that our CEO has 20 accounts out there and they're collecting money from people for various reasons. And the people think that it's really the CEO of this large company on LinkedIn or Facebook or something like that. So they have a kind of vetted process where like, oh, I'm talking to the guy or the gal at this company, right? I'm giving some information. Why would a CEO ask you for money? That's probably not the case in a lot of times, but they'll ask for your information. Oh, sign up here. We're having a sweepstakes or something like that. And then they have more information from you to deploy an inevitable scam against you, right? So you want to make sure that you know how many social media accounts you have that you're aware of. How many social media accounts do you have that you're not aware of, right? What's your personal information looking like online? And, folks, right now, I'll tell you, as far as personal information, you never want to put your kids' information out there, right? It astonishes me that how many parents on the first day of school, we're all proud of our kids, I get it. But on the first day of school, they'll take a photo of their kid with a backpack in front of the school. They say, look at my awesome third grader or eighth grader, whatever. My gal is going into high school. Super proud. But don't do that. You just showed the bad actors where your kid goes to school. And we have a lot of really scary stories that are real war stories based on the cases that have come to us where people have engaged people's kids by following the path that the parents easily lay out for these offenders. So you want to know all that. You want to know, where's my personal information? And if something is out there that's concerning, and it's always concerning, by the way, we've never had an assessment, an online threat assessment is what we call those, OTAs, where we go back to the client, we say, okay, this is how far you're exposed. This is all of your information. They say, oh, I'm copacetic. I'm good to go with all that. No, they're always surprised. And you want to make sure that you know what's out there so you can then pivot and address it accordingly. Do you need to take down information? Do you need to suppress information? Because if you're, covered on a platform or some kind of medium where they're not going to take it down, do you want to try to suppress it as much as possible? With legal allowances and ethics and stuff, you got to talk to, whoever you need to legally advise that. But, there's options out there. You don't know what's relevant until you figure out where you lie inside that kind of online exposed ecosystem.
What are your chances if you're a victim to get your money back? Do you have any kind of statistics that 2 out of 10 victims usually succeed and usually there is a success story behind it, or you can't really mention any of this?
I mean, as far as like non-cryptocurrency payments, banks these days, in my opinion, they've grown more brazen. I remember a time 7 years ago, something like that, where banks were like, hey, if you're victimized by a fraudster and you lost $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever it is, and banks would just give that money back to their customer. And then they would work an investigation on the back end. And if they found out that their customer defrauded them, they'd lay down the hammer on them. I know of a time nowadays where banks are putting up more of a front, where, not a front, but they're putting up more of a wall to their own customers, where if customers are going to their financial institutions where the money was taken out of fraudulently, right? And the banks are kind of shaming them. The banks are not willing to work with them as much, in my opinion, across a lot of different scenarios. And I think that that's a big problem because it re-victimizes the individual. Because a lot of times it really is a scam. And the banks have the audacity of them sometimes, in my opinion, is pretty rough, because they'll say, well, technically you gave them the money. Okay, I get that. Yes, I gave them the money, but there's a whole context that you are conveniently missing out on. And it's frustrating to me to hear, as an investigator, trying to put the pieces together. And I know very well, with the evidence that we unfold, that they were scammed. Yes, they hit send, but it was through pretext that was not legitimate. And the banks these days, I've noticed that they're not fending for their own customers. And I think that's a really big miss. I don't think it's ethical. And I don't think that that's a way to safeguard your name as a reputable bank, and also really go to bat for your customers, when they get victimized.
And you think people are gullible? They want to trust, and that's why it's easy to scam them, or they are still a bit cautious about what's going on?
I think these days people are hardened more than they were a while ago, because we're all embedded inside this ecosystem where scams are really prevalent. And not only they're prevalent, but I hate saying this every time, but they're really effective. I mean, no longer is the one victim battling an individual. They're battling an institution. They're battling an underground operation. It's not one person. It's an operation. That's hard to fight. So it's kind of like society has become jaded, rightfully so, in my opinion, because of all of these attacks, because of all these failures, because of banks turning into the customer, their own customer, saying, well, technically you sent it, so it's not fraud or it's not unauthorized. I get that by definition, it might not be unauthorized, but there's context that really kind of proves otherwise, outside of the strong definition there. But Yeah, I think people do want to trust. I mean, we're humans, right? We're human beings, and we want to enrich ourselves inside society. We want to belong and we want to be happy. And with that comes trusting your neighbor, right? But we've now have put up these walls where we can't really do that. And some of it's to our benefit because we got to safeguard ourselves. But a lot of it is to our detriment as a society.
Yeah. And it's super interesting to see because I am dealing with the other side of the coin when people are struggling with their honest and justified transactions because the bank is asking so many questions, because the bank is blocking their funds on the suspicion that something might go wrong. They are not doing anything wrong. There is just an opportunity for either tax evasion or scam. The banks are immediately blocking them out. But if I can see that there are still a lot of things which are still going through. So it's an interesting question that what would be the solution for that? Do more of the blocks and the obstacles and squeeze all of those people, even the good actors out more, justifying the bad guys? What's the good answer for that? Because too much of a banking resilience also hinders innovation, also hinders the free flow of funds. So it's a very interesting question. And I think the next question is really just about that how do you handle these day-to-day payments to balance the convenience in terms of regulation, in terms of questions with the security and privacy, and how far shall we go to defend the victims, but still enable people who are genuinely nice? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, you want to install your 2FA, MFA opportunities to safeguard your information. And you also want to turn on some notifications. I mean, with banking institutions, you can set notifications in your account for anomalous logins. And that could be, depending on the bank, that could be a new device logging into your account. It could be a new location logging into your account. It could be a new browser logging into your account. So you want to set those things up. You want to set up notifications based on transactions. And depending on what bank you're with, you can set up a notification from your bank to alert you whenever any transaction comes in of being equal to a penny or greater. That's every single transaction, right? Now, some banks limit it to the minimum of $1. So sometimes you wouldn't therefore become notified to a transaction of 87 cents or something like that. But try to minimize it as low as your bank will let you know. Whenever you have a transaction that hits your account, I say a penny or above, right here in the States, right? Whatever the minimum is across the globe there. And then you're alerted to every single transaction that hits your account, because there's micro charges that fraudsters try to put through your account. They try to just see if anyone's watching, and they try to see if that's a valid credit card or bank account. If you don't catch those, then the next transaction could be $45,000, something like that. And we talked about some problems with trying to get that money back. You also want to try to regularly audit your permissions on your payment apps. And that's banking payment apps, that's peer-to-peer payment apps, all that stuff. Because even if you're successful at setting up the right security settings on your apps, when you download updates, a lot of times those updates reset. This is with social media. This is with other apps as well. So all those privacy parameters that you stood up, and good for you for doing that, they go back to the defaults, which is very, very frustrating. So therefore, you got to make sure that you just routinely go ahead and review those notification settings, those permission settings on the apps that make sense. I mean, if you can do it on all of them, sweet. But the main ones, you want to make sure that you routinely do that, because when you install updates, they go back to the default private or a public setting. You don't want that.
I heard this expression somewhere, and I'm very curious about how would you explain that? Open source intelligence. What is it? What are you using it for? And how does it benefit any kind of investigation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big OSINT investigator, right? I do cyber investigations, OSINT investigations. So OSINT is open source intelligence, and it's pretty much as it indicates, just open available information on someone or something. Now, there's a difference between information and intelligence, right? Information is anything out there. Once you analyze it and you convert it into something valuable, then it becomes intelligence. But yeah, that's everything that we've been talking about. That's your public setting as far as peer-to-peer applications, payment applications. That's your exposure online. That's anything that's really available to the public, right? Open source, available to the public. But it takes some good skill set to be able to delve into that world as effectively as possible. Anybody can Google people. Anybody can Google somebody. Anybody can Google an entity. And nowadays, with streaming services, everyone watches true crime documentaries, and they think I call them armchair detectives, because they saw a couple of documentaries and they hit Google and they're like, I can figure this out. So, but it takes real skill set to be able to ascertain as much information inside the depths of the OSINT world and assemble it into intelligence to try to build a dossier on a system or a situation or an individual that's highly valuable, but it's data that's out there. It's all of our data, whether it's company-based, entity-based, otherwise, or an individual. I mean, we investigate organizations too. I mean, pick your kind of incorporation. You can still have somebody doing something illicit there. But yeah, open source intelligence, OSINT, that's all the information that's out there that's available to the public on someone or something. And just as I use it as an investigator to try to pull back the curtain on an operation or an individual, bad actors are using it to target us.
Can you ruin someone's reputation by falsifying some of this open source information out there, and in this way ruin their chances, for example, for credit or any other way, just defame them, which is part of some kind of a crime as well? Have you ever seen anything like that, when someone is intentionally ruining reputation through the openly available social media platforms or sources?
Yeah, 100%. So it's identity theft to their to their advantage, right? The bad actors. And sometimes, in effect, the victim becomes disadvantaged through damage to their reputation. Sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes we have clients that contact us, and they know that they ticked somebody off, and now this person ended up being a troll, and they're going at them and just really blasting them across the internet, saying they're worthless individuals. They do this, they do illegal stuff, they do illicit stuff. Sometimes it's intentional. We get plenty of those cases where basically you're framed online, right? Or you're just blasted online. And nowadays, with with the short attention span that people have, they see one article come up that's bad, and they don't really do much more research on you anymore. And that could affect your career. That can affect your personal interests. If you want to say, be a Cub Scout leader, right? Or if you want to work with kids, or if you want to work with other individuals that are emotionally vulnerable, or, some kind of setting where you really have to be a trusted individual, right? That could really shut it down. And if that's your life adventure, if that's your life mission, you've just upset your entire focus. Maybe you went to school for all of this. It really can invert what your future looks like. So absolutely, we get those cases all the time where, like I said, it's an effect of something else. But a lot of times we get those cases because it's intentionally damaging the individual for whatever reason. It's always some silly reason, but the effect is not silly. The effect is real and highly damaging.
And I have to ask this: AI, blessing or a curse? What do you think?
So, yeah. So Skynet, right, from Terminator. I can't stop thinking about that. But AI has its benefits. It's really like any tool out there. I mean, there's good and bad, right? And it's not quite the tool, it's the user. It's how you use that information. It's what you do with that information. So I think AI is bettering society's progress, right? Pharmaceutical industry, medical industry, legal industry, research, archaeology, all that stuff. I think it's really benefiting society as a whole in progressing. However, it absolutely can be turned into a malicious tool. Now, AI traditionally comes with roadblocks or some kind of parameters where they say, okay, I can't dig up personal information on Chris, can't give you his phone number or something like that. But there's ways of manipulating the data, or at least these agents sometimes, where you can get other information that where it's just enough for you to impact the individual, for you to implement your plan against them. Again, whether you're trolling them, you're looking to dupe them through a phishing engagement, you're looking to set them up otherwise. So AI, right? It's a tool. So it by itself is not good or bad, but I think the use of it can be good, can be bad. It just depends on, where those hands are coming from, manipulating that data or querying that data, using the data.
So do you use it in your work, AI?
Yeah, of course. So I always want to be better tomorrow than I am today. I always want to be more efficient tomorrow than I am today. So yeah, with that, we definitely use AI. All of us have been using AI-based tools for a long time, much longer than we've been talking about the term AI. We just didn't really know what it was. But now it's the hot and heavy term that everyone throws around. But yeah, and I frankly say, if you can understand AI and use it to your benefit, but also understand the dangers of it and don't use it in that capacity, then I think it's great to use. For instance, me as an investigator, I'm not going to put a phone number into AI. I'm not going to put, a name of, let's say I'm doing an OTA, online threat assessment, where we're basically a cyber stalker of our client and we're looking at the online exposure rate of theirs, right? So I wouldn't put my client's information, say, hey, AI, let me know where they're exposed. Show me everything about them. No, that's sensitive information. So you want to make sure that you understand when to use it and when not to use it.
Wow. There are so many interesting topics that we touched today. And I think I personally learned so much about security from a totally different perspective as we usually discuss. Is there something, Chris, that you think that we should talk about more? Is there something that we missed out, although we should have said? Is there something else that you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to stay educated to what's out there. And I get it. Education is boring. I understand. We all want the easy button, like, hey, I'm in this mess. I'm embedded in a romance scam or cryptocurrency fraud, pig butchering, whatever you want to call it, this situation. I want that easy button, right? I want to hit the easy button. I don't mind easy buttons either, but you got to be diligent, right? The easy button doesn't always exist. So you want to make sure that you're diligent, one, with your data, and two, with knowing where you're exposed. Because if you don't really keep check on the pulse of your online safety, of your online exposure, then you won't know what's out there. You won't know what you're subject to, right? Again, until it's too late. You find yourself the victim of an ATO, from your email account, your social media, your bank account, whatever it may be, where you've got this phishing campaign, and it could spread from your person, your individual, or your company. So you want to make sure that you just inherit as much education as possible on the latest and greatest, right? And that includes the not so great, such as all these leaks that we're learning about. I mean, billions of records that were released publicly. You want to know if you're part of that. Is your bank account part of that? Is your password? We see plain text passwords all the time. I could take the person's username and password and go into their whatever blank account. I'm not going to, because that's illegal, but the information's out there. The bad actors, they don't care about what's illegal and what's not illegal. They're going to use that information against you as much as possible. So having said that, you really want to educate yourself as much as possible with the dangers out there, the kind of security landscape, and identify how exposed you are so you can pivot and respond according to that exposed information and safeguard yourself as much as possible.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think it was such a very interesting webinar. And I would like to encourage everyone, as Chris said, that even if you don't have a problem today, reach out to Chris, do a basic audit, just find out where are your vulnerabilities are and how you can actually defend yourself online, so you don't have to call Chris when the cracks hit. And unfortunately, you call him with a fear in your eye instead of just a hopeful trust to make things more secure. So please do reach out to us with your questions. Please shoot all of your real life experience. We would like to know about it. And please do your due diligence in every way, how much information is out about you, and defend your personal data. So thank you very much for everyone who was here with us today. And I hope that we will speak with Chris very, very soon in the near future.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Marcia Klingensmith. Instant payments is transforming the way money moves all across the globe, across all the different industries. A recent study showed that 42% of instant payment transactions actually happen on the evenings and weekends. About $200 billion is currently locked up in the European financial system today. And instant payments really can help unlock this liquidity. The future of finance is instant, and those who adapt will thrive.